Today, we are going to peel back the layers of a man who is simultaneously praised as the savior of humanity and cursed as its most dangerous madman. A disruptor, a visionary, and an agent of pure chaos. Elon Musk. Hope you enjoy. Some men look at the world and try to fit in. Others look at the world and try to fix it. But then there is a rare, terrifying breed of human that looks at the world, decides it's fundamentally broken, and attempts to completely rebuild it from scratch. To the public, he is a walking headline, a billionaire mogul who can melt global markets with a single, late-night tweet, a man who builds rocket ships with one hand and rewires the global automotive industry with the other. But behind the blinding glare of the cameras, the soaring stock prices, and the grand promises of multiplanetary life, lies a deeply complex, erratic, and deeply scarred mind. A mind that has been running at a fever pitch since childhood, driven not by the pursuit of mere wealth, but by a haunting, existential dread, a literal fear that if he doesn't build the future, there won't be a future left to inherit. This is not a clean, polished story of success. It is a grueling, chaotic, and brutal saga of a man who willingly steps into the fires of bankruptcy, public ridicule, and personal tragedy, time and time again, just to see if he can survive. This is the untamed cinematic journey of Elon Musk. Our story begins far away from the high-tech laboratories of Silicon Valley or the launch pads of Cape Canaveral. It begins in the sun-drenched, yet deeply tense environment of Pretoria, South Africa, in June of 1971, born to Elon Musk, a brilliant but emotionally volatile electromechanical engineer, and May Musk, a fiercely independent model and dietitian. Young Elon was an anomaly from the very start. He wasn't the charismatic, popular kid on the playground. He was quiet, dead quiet. In fact, he was so profoundly lost in his own thoughts that his parents and doctors genuinely believed he was deaf, even going so far as to surgically remove his adenoids just to see if it would fix his hearing. But Elon wasn't deaf. He was just traveling through the infinite corridors of his own imagination. His childhood bedroom was a fortress of solitude. While other kids were playing sports, Elon was consuming books at an inhuman pace. He would read for 14 hours a day, devouring entire encyclopedias, sci-fi novels, and philosophy texts. Isaac Asimov's Foundation series didn't just entertain him. It practically hardwired his brain with a lifelong mission: that civilization must expand beyond Earth to preserve the spark of human consciousness. But the real world outside his books was brutally hostile. School was a living nightmare. Elon was severely bullied, a target for packs of boys who found his awkward, hyper-literal demeanor intolerable. The violence culminated in an incident at Bryanston High School, where a group of boys threw him down a massive flight of concrete stairs and beat him until he lost consciousness. He woke up in a hospital bed, his nose shattered, his respiratory passages damaged, scars that he carries to this very day. And yet, home offered no sanctuary. His parents divorced, and Elon made the fateful, agonizing choice to live with his father, a decision he would later describe as the greatest mistake of his life, speaking of a dark, psychological terror that filled the house. Trapped between the violence of school and the emotional warfare at home, a 10-year-old Elon found a lifeline, the Commodore VIC-20. It was a primitive computer by today's standards, but to Elon, it was a universe where he held absolute control. He taught himself to code in just a few days, eventually creating a sci-fi video game called Blaster and selling it to a magazine for $500. It was a tiny crack of light in an otherwise dark childhood. Elon realized early on that if he wanted to change his destiny, he had to leave South Africa. He saw America not just as a country, but as the land where impossible things were allowed to happen. At 17, with barely any money, he packed a single bag and fled to Canada, using his mother's heritage to secure a passport, working brutal manual labor jobs, shoveling dirt in sub-zero temperatures, cleaning boilers in lumber mills, all while keeping his eyes firmly fixed on the horizon. He eventually transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, studying physics and economics. He was preparing his mind, accumulating the raw scientific tools he would need to attack the three frontiers he believed would define the future of humanity: the Internet, sustainable energy, and space exploration. By the mid-1990s, Silicon Valley was experiencing a gold rush unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Internet was transitioning from an academic playground into a global nervous system. Elon Musk, fresh out of college and briefly enrolled in a PhD program at Stanford, looked at this digital explosion and realized he couldn't sit in a classroom while history was being written outside. He dropped out after just 2 days. In 1995, Elon and his younger brother Kimball founded a company called Zip2. The concept was laughably simple today, but revolutionary back then. A digital yellow pages that mapped out businesses and gave directions. They had no venture capital, no luxury office, and no safety net. They rented a tiny, suffocating office in Palo Alto. Elon lived in that office, sleeping on a cheap futon because he couldn't afford an apartment. He showered at the local YMCA. He coded for 20 hours a day, and when he finally collapsed from exhaustion, he told his employees to literally kick him awake so he could keep working. It was a brutal, manic pace that set the standard for every company he would ever run. The gamble paid off. In 1999, Compaq bought Zip2 for over $300 million in cash. At 28 years old, the boy who had been beaten down concrete stairs in South Africa was suddenly handed a check for $22 million. Most people would take that money, buy an island, and disappear into a life of absolute luxury. Elon bought a McLaren F1 supercar, yes, but he plowed almost every single cent of his remaining fortune straight into his next wild gamble. XCOM was an audacious attempt to completely revolutionize the archaic, slow-moving banking system by moving money entirely online. It was a chaotic, high-stakes battlefield. The company eventually merged with its fiercest competitor, Confinity, co-founded by Peter Thiel and Max Levchin. This merged entity would eventually be renamed PayPal. The environment inside PayPal was toxic with ambition. The culture was a relentless clash of brilliant, hyper-aggressive egos, a group that the media would later dub the PayPal Mafia. Elon's management style was unyielding, often chaotic. He demanded 24-hour work cycles and clashed bitterly with his co-founders over technical infrastructure. The internal friction reached a boiling point in late 2000. While Elon was on a rare, long-overdue honeymoon with his first wife Justine, the board executed a brutal, silent coup. They stripped him of his CEO title and replaced him with Peter Thiel. Imagine the immense psychological blow. He was pushed out of the very company he had bled for while on an airplane. But instead of burning the house down in a fit of rage, Elon remained a major shareholder, swallowed his pride, and watched as eBay bought PayPal in 2002 for $1.5 billion. When the dust settled, Elon Musk walked away with $180 million after taxes. He was 31 years old. He possessed wealth that could last for 10 lifetimes. But the demons of his childhood were still chasing him, and the existential clock in his head was ticking louder than ever. He looked up at the sky, realized NASA had no concrete plans to go to Mars, and decided that if the governments of the world wouldn't build the future, he would have to buy it himself. In 2002, Elon Musk moved to Los Angeles, a city filled with dreamers, but he wasn't there to make movies. He was there to build rockets. He founded Space Exploration Technologies, SpaceX, with a mission that sounded like absolute lunacy to the traditional aerospace establishment: to reduce space transportation costs by a factor of 100 and eventually colonize Mars. He flew to Russia with a team to buy refurbished intercontinental ballistic missiles, only to be spit on, treated like an amateur by Russian generals, and priced out. On the flight home, sitting in the cabin, Elon turned to his team with a spreadsheet he had created from scratch. He had calculated the raw material cost of a rocket, the aluminum, the titanium, the fuel, and realized that the aerospace industry was charging massive, bloated markups. "We can build the rockets ourselves," he said. Shortly after, in 2004, Elon encountered a tiny, struggling electric car startup founded by Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning. The company was named Tesla Motors. While the rest of the automotive industry viewed electric cars as slow, ugly golf carts meant for environmental purists, Elon saw a path to a sustainable energy future. He became the lead investor, pouring millions into the company and taking over the product design vision. He was now fighting a two-front war against the most entrenched, heavily capitalized industries on Earth, the military-industrial complex of aerospace and the century-old giants of Detroit. Then came 2008, the darkest, most brutal year of his life, a year that almost utterly destroyed him. SpaceX had spent years developing the Falcon 1, a small experimental rocket. The first launch in 2006 failed in less than a minute. The second launch in 2007 failed to reach orbit. The third launch in August of 2008, carrying high-profile NASA payloads, suffered a catastrophic staging failure and exploded in the atmosphere. Elon had poured over $100 million of his own PayPal fortune into SpaceX. There was only enough money left for one final, desperate fourth launch. If it failed, SpaceX was dead. Simultaneously, Tesla was bleeding cash like an open wound. The development of their first sports car, the Roadster, was plagued by massive cost overruns and engineering blunders. The global economy was crashing into the Great Recession. Nobody wanted to invest in a volatile electric car company or a failing rocket startup. To make matters worse, his personal life was disintegrating. His marriage to Justine collapsed into a highly publicized, bitter divorce. He was sleeping in his office, surviving on caffeine and sleeping pills, his skin gray from absolute exhaustion. He was facing the very real, terrifying prospect of total bankruptcy. He had to look into the eyes of his employees and realize he might not be able to pay them next week. On September 28, 2008, the remaining crew of SpaceX stood around a monitor on Kwajalein Atoll in the Pacific Ocean. The Falcon 1 sat on the pad. The countdown reached 0. The engine ignited. The rocket soared into the dark blue sky. The first stage separated perfectly. The second stage fired. And for the first time in human history, a privately developed, liquid-fueled rocket successfully reached orbit around the Earth. It was a miracle, but the war wasn't won. Tesla was still hours away from death on Christmas Eve of 2008. Elon made the ultimate agonizing gamble. He took every single remaining cent he had left in the world, scraped together loans from friends, and poured it into Tesla, finalizing a critical $40 million financing round just hours before the company would have declared bankruptcy. 2 days later, NASA called. They had watched the successful fourth launch of the Falcon, won and awarded SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract to resupply the International Space Station. Elon Musk had stared directly into the abyss of total ruin, smiled, and won. The next decade was a blistering, high-speed ascent from a fringe disruptor into the dominant force of global industry. With the financial bleeding stopped, Elon Musk set out to prove that his victories in 2008 weren't flukes. SpaceX did what every major aerospace company said was physically impossible. They began landing orbital-class rocket boosters vertically back on Earth. Think about the sheer science fiction grandiosity of that sight. A 14-story-tall metal cylinder falling from the edge of space at thousands of miles an hour, lighting its engines in the final seconds, and gently settling down onto a floating drone ship in the middle of a roaring ocean. It turned rocket engineering from an expensive, disposable luxury into a reusable, routine utility. Meanwhile, Tesla released the Model S in 2012. It wasn't just a great electric car. It was widely rated as one of the greatest cars ever built, period. It was fast, beautiful, and completely shattered the stereotype of the sluggish electric vehicle. It forced the entire global automotive industry, Volkswagen, General Motors, and Toyota, to completely scrap their long-term plans and pivot heavily toward electrification. But Elon's greatest trial was still waiting for him. In 2016, Tesla announced the Model 3, an affordable mass-market electric car meant for the general public. Hundreds of thousands of people placed down payments within days. It was an unprecedented wave of demand, but demand means nothing if you cannot build the product. From 2017 to 2018, Tesla entered what Elon would publicly term production hell. The company attempted to over-automate the assembly lines in Fremont, California, resulting in a chaotic mess of robotic failures, battery supply bottlenecks, and massive delays. Tesla was burning through hundreds of millions of dollars a week. Short sellers, investors betting billions that Tesla would go bankrupt, were circling the company like vultures, mocking Elon daily on financial news networks. The pressure broke something inside him. Elon practically moved into the Fremont factory. He didn't leave for months. He slept on the hard floor underneath conference room tables, wearing the same clothes for days, deeply immersed in the engineering details of the assembly line. His behavior grew increasingly erratic. He took to Twitter at 3 a.m., picking fights with regulators, journalists, and short sellers. He infamously smoked a joint on Joe Rogan's podcast, causing Tesla's stock to plummet and prompting a federal security review of his rocket contracts. He was a billionaire living like a manic, desperate soldier trapped in a trench. He pushed his engineers to the absolute brink of human endurance, demanding they build a temporary assembly line inside a massive tent in the factory parking lot just to hit their production targets. Once again, his sheer, unyielding stubbornness bent reality to his will. The bottlenecks cleared. The Model 3s began rolling off the line by the thousands. Tesla didn't just survive. It became a wildly profitable juggernaut. By 2019, the company had established Gigafactory Shanghai in record time, locking down the world's largest automotive market. The short sellers were utterly wiped out in what became one of the greatest stock market rallies in human history. Elon Musk had built a sustainable energy powerhouse, and the world was finally forced to admit that his madness had a method. By 2021, the financial markets had rewarded his victories with astronomical numbers. Tesla's valuation surged past $1 trillion, making Elon Musk on paper the richest individual in modern history. But comfort is an emotion Elon Musk simply does not possess. When he has no crises left to solve, he creates them. In May of 2020, amidst a global pandemic, SpaceX made history by launching American astronauts to the International Space Station from American soil for the first time since the retirement of the Space Shuttle. He had broken the monopoly of nation-states on human spaceflight. Simultaneously, he began deploying Starlink, a massive constellation of thousands of low-Earth orbit satellites designed to beam high-speed internet to every single square inch of the globe, fundamentally changing the geopolitics of global communication. Then came 2022, and the ultimate manifestation of his chaotic energy. Disturbed by what he viewed as the erosion of free speech and the rise of ideological censorship, Elon launched a hostile, erratic $44 billion takeover of Twitter. The acquisition was a corporate earthquake. He walked into the San Francisco headquarters carrying a porcelain sink, tweeting, "Let that sink in." He immediately fired the top executives, slashed nearly 80% of the workforce, and rebranded the platform as X. It was a brutal, highly controversial restructuring that alienated advertisers, sparked intense political debates, and turned him into one of the most polarizing figures on the planet. He was no longer just the popular tech guy building cool cars. He was now at the dead center of the global culture war. But while the media obsessively fixates on his political battles and his social media behavior, the real engineering work continues in the dirt of Boca Chica, Texas. There, SpaceX is developing Starship, the largest, most powerful flying object ever built by human hands. A towering, 400-foot-tall steel behemoth designed to carry 100 tons of cargo and humans to the Moon and, ultimately, to Mars. Every launch of Starship is a cinematic spectacle of fire and steel. The early prototypes exploded repeatedly, but Elon merely cheered, gathered the data, and built another one. It is the physical manifestation of his philosophy. Fail fast, learn faster, and never, ever stop moving. Look at the sheer, staggering scope of his modern empire. Through Tesla, he drives the clean energy transition. Through SpaceX, he commands the heavens. Through Neuralink, he seeks to merge the human brain with artificial intelligence. Through XAI and his newest model, Claude, he is actively shaping the future of synthetic intelligence. He stands on the dusty plains of Texas, looking up at the night sky. One thing is absolutely undeniable. We are all living in a world that is being fundamentally reshaped by the sheer, unbending force of his will. Love him or hate him, Elon Musk is the architect of our tomorrow. That's all from Mango. Thanks for watching. If you loved this deep dive into the chaotic and historic journey of Elon Musk, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment about whether you think he'll actually get us to Mars, and subscribe to the channel for more epic sagas of the legends defining our world. See you next time. Bye.